Hello and welcome back to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, we're breaking down the year in the comic book industry in two parts. In part one, we'll look at the state of the comic book industry as a whole, as well as what things were going on in society that may have impacted the comic book industry during that year. We'll talk big picture about what's going on at DC and independent comics, then we'll shift our focus to Marvel. We'll look at who is creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics debuted or ended. In part 2, we'll dive deep into Marvel's longest-running characters, Matt Murdock. We'll look at what the year had in store for the Man Without Fear, key things that happened, and who joined or left his world before spotlighting one key issue or story. From there, we'll wrap up the year's discussion with a takeaway before moving on to another year and a whole new discussion. We're excited to have you join us on a trip through comic book history. We are back with another new year. It's 2009. My name is Dwayne, and with me, as always, is my good buddy Dan. Dan, how you doing today?
Doing great. Look forward to talking some comics. It's been a busy and warm week or so here in the North Dakota area, which I'm sure, as you're basking in the relative coolness down in Phoenix, you're probably feeling bad for me for how warm it is up here.
Yes, but I wouldn't know anything about warm weather in the desert here. Definitely not. All right, Dan, before we jump in and talk about the year, it looks like you got a note that you want to talk about history.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's kind of what we're talking about here is, every other week we actually talk a little bit about the history of comics, not just to one character. And there's a point at which, as somebody who's spent most of my life, studying history, you start to wonder, how old does something need to be before it's history instead of just journalism or something like this, right? And or recent rumors, potentially. So, we're going to continue with Daredevil right up until the modern day. But how far along do we keep doing the year in reviews? And I'd be interested in hearing from some of the folks out in the podcast world. We could stop at around 2015 because really they say something before needed to be 20 years before it could be history. The way things have accelerated in time now, I'd say 10 is probably fine. Do we go to 2020 and deal with like the pandemic and all of that craziness? Or do we try and go right up to present day? I'm not so terribly sure how comfortable I am putting something out on the internet talking about the history of comics in 2021 or 2022, because God knows what some of those comments and thoughts are going to look like 5 or 10 years from now, right?
Sure.
So I'm looking to see where we might want to move to just finishing up Daredevil and not trying to cover all of the changes, many of which are still sort of ongoing, that are happening in comics. So I think 2015 is probably the earliest we would quit. We could try it right up until present day. I'd like to know kind of where people think would be a reasonable point to move on from this and say we are now past the point of being able to do an actual real thoughtful look at what were the best comics of a year or what were the real trends of a year, because it's just too close.
Yeah, I know you've been talking about it's been that it was going to get more difficult to kind of put together that information because the sources that are available to you don't have that information, and like you'd have to try and find it in other places, and who knows how accurate that information is going to be. And so it's interesting.
Weird thing is, I mean, there's astonishing amounts of information. How much of it is dependable and how much of it is really baked to the point where you can say that there's a consensus on it is what we start to look at.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll figure that out as we go along. But if you had any thoughts, feel free to send them to us. Love to hear it.
Yes, we'll talk about the email address and our social media address at the end of the show. We'd love to get your thoughts. Dan, I think we should also ask our audience what they think we should do next. We've been talking about it a little bit. We're rapidly approaching modern day Daredevil. And then we were like, well, now what do we do? Because we've done Moon Knight. We've done kind of an MCU / comic book review in tandem. and now we've done kind of the history of comics as well as a deep dive into Daredevil, and we've been talking about it briefly a little bit, some options. I'm curious. We threw out the idea to our audience once upon a time, and I was thinking maybe we should do that this time too, and see if we get back any interesting suggestions as well.
Yep. I think actually a number of the people who responded back in the day when we asked the question at the end of Moon Knight had recommended Daredevil. And we weren't quite ready to go to. I wasn't quite ready to dig into that big a history right off the bat, but we did get around to it. So we do, take seriously what you guys are looking for next. So send us some information on what you might think would be a cool thing to do as the next project, next season.
Yes, since you presumably might be giving us some feedback on our history question, I thought that might be another question that we could throw out there as well, and get your feedback.
Absolutely.
All right, Dan, I think that's enough for now. Why don't we jump in and let's talk about the year in comics for 2009. The year in comics. All right, Dan, 2009. We just had the big year with the kind of the birth of the MCU in 2008. We had a big, I think there was a really big crossover. Wasn't Secret Wars last year in 2008?
2008 was Dark Reign.
Dark Reign. Okay. So what is 2009 look like?
2009. And so Dark Reign, of course, was just Marvel. 2009, though, is a really tough year for comics. And in fact, you talk about 2008 as a big year because it had Iron Man and it had all of this other stuff and sort of this reawakening culturally of people recognizing what's out there with comics. But as we started to go into 2009 and take a look back at what was happening, it was kind of disastrous because with the recession, and with the fact that comic book publishers were starting to raise their prices, and with the fact that there were problems coming out of the housing crisis that caused rents and the like to really balloon for a lot of comic stores, what 2008 really set the stage for was a catastrophic year in 2009 for a good part of the comic industry.
Oh, wow.
So sales declined this year for the first time in quite a number of years.
I was going to say close to a decade now, right?
Yep, probably about a decade. It wasn't a huge decline, about 2%. When you look at it compared to what was going on in the rest of the economy, technically comics did pretty well. But if you look under the numbers a little, the decline of total book sales was down almost 10%. And it was just the fact that the actual price of the individual books had been hiked by the publishers that made it so that the total sales shortfall
made up for it. Yeah, okay.
Which also means people were buying fewer comics and spending almost as much money doing it. Besides that, we had comic store closures at a point we really hadn't seen since the 90s. There are apocryphal things saying that in some areas up to 50% of the stores were closing. Probably there's a pretty solid reason to believe that at least 20 to 25% of all the comic book stores that were open as of 2007 are closed as of 2010.
Wow. That is a lot.
It's a substantial sort of culling of the market in terms of where comic books can be found. Same thing happens because you're having some of the major chains, like, say, Waldenbooks, actually starting to close up some of their brick and mortar locations. So Waldenbooks eventually goes out of business. Some of you may not even know what that is, but that was a Barnes & Noble competitor that primarily worked out of malls. There were Waldenbooks in almost every mall in America for a while. And so what this all resulted in is it was just harder for people to find comic books, both in terms of through the direct market and through retail channels, than it had been a year or so ago. We also then, because of the fact that cover prices rose, had people a little angry at the fact that, look, we're having all these problems and they're raising prices on us, etc. So there was some sort of customer pushback on that as well. Although I think most people were just getting hammered by higher prices everywhere, so we weren't particularly surprised the comic books were going up in cover price as well. But so that's where we are. It's not a great year in terms of the background economics. I will also say that it's not a perfect year in terms of content either, and we'll get to that as we go through things.
Okay. So what about how does this translate into film and TV? We had the big year last year. Are they able to follow it up with another big year?
They are not. What we have this year actually is a mixed bag in terms of, we always have some animated things. DC did a Superman, Batman, Public Enemies animated direct-to-TV cartoon. There was a Green Lantern First Flight animated that went direct-to-TV. A Wonder Woman movie did the same. One interesting one was they finished off the 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series, which had gone from like 2003 to 2008 or whatever, with a final movie that dropped on, I think, Cartoon Network or something. But it actually was a crossover between the 1987 Turtles and the 2003 version Turtles, kind of from different dimensions. So they teamed up kind of like Justice League, Justice Society sort of style. And that was actually kind of cool. It was called Turtles Forever. Outside of that, we had a number of movies in theaters. One that didn't make it to theaters, also animated, was called The Haunted World of El Superbeasto. And this, believe it or not, was the brainchild of Rob Zombie, like the musician.
That actually doesn't surprise me, actually.
Yep. It's R-rated. It's animated. It had a $10 million budget by the time they were done. And as far as I can tell, it either got locked up in some sort of rights war or something. By the time they actually got it ready to go, it ended up just being dropped out to video, did not get a theatrical release, probably lost them almost the entire $10 million.
Oh, wow.
I've never actually seen this, and after reading about it, I have to admit I would be interested in taking it. So I'm going to have to go out and check out where I can find Haunted World of El Superbeasto and check that out. We then actually had only 4 actual movies that were released based on comic books that I could find. We had Whiteout, $25 million budget, starred Kate Beckinsale, came off a relatively cool story by Greg Rucka that was done through Oni Press. Unfortunately, only made $18 million. Terrible reviews, and it was pretty awful. I'm a big Kate Beckinsale fan. I will watch just about anything she was in from back in the day. I've watched all of the Underworld movies and everything like this. But this one was not good. And that does sadden me because, like I said, I like the graphic novel. I like Rucka's stuff. I was really looking forward to this movie.
Okay.
We had Surrogates come out. Bigger budget, $80 million.
I think I remember that one. Okay.
Yep. So $80 million budget. It's from a top shelf comic by a guy named Robert Venditti. Bruce Willis starred in it. It's a sci-fi thriller in a future where people have sort of decided to not take the risk of actually going outside. So they just sit in the house and they've got robot bodies that wander around and go to work and shop and interact with the world instead so that they don't have to. Ended up making doing $120 million at the box office, 122, which is not great. You could tell that they knew they had some problems with the movie because they did not allow any press pre-screenings, and it opened to generally poor reviews after a pretty decent first week. So they did what a lot of times back in the days theaters always did, which was if they had a big star and a big budget and a movie that they knew would end up being terrible, they simply would not let the reviewers tell anybody until after they got the first weekend to get grosses from the people who didn't know any better and just went to see it. And then the bad reviews would drop and you would have this massive drop off in the next weeks. But
yes.
So Surrogate's not particularly good. But again, we had this kind of cool thing that Oni Press actually had, one of these. Top Shelf does another. Watchmen comes out this year. And then also Watchmen, the director's cut. So both of them. The director's cut comes out the same year as the movie. This is by Zack Snyder, of course, adapting the, absolutely critical Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons graphic novel from the 80s. $140 million budget. It does make money at $187 million, or it clears more than its budget. It almost certainly lost money in that case. Reviews on this were mixed. My man Roger Ebert, who is probably my favorite critic of the time, actually loved it. I would say that the long and short of it is that most people said there's great visuals and it's a fantastic adaptation of the comic book, but it's super confusing. And part of the reason it's super confusing is that Watchmen is a really dense graphic novel, and getting it
yes,
down
it
into
is.
even a 3-hour movie is difficult. So a lot of things had to be left out. One of the things they left out was actually a Tales of the Black Freighter story, that if you read Watchmen, Tales of the Black Freighter is actually sort of a meta story going on in a comic book in the middle of the Watchmen comic. We read this, so you remember that, probably.
Yeah. I read this. It's like at the beginning or at the end of each chapter, you get parts of this story,
Yep.
And it just keeps going throughout the novel, and yeah, it's that's a really interesting sort of thing that's going on while this other story is taking place.
And originally, Snyder was going to have that in the movie. So he filmed, or at least planned out a lot of this in terms of how it was going to work, how the CGI would work. He'd cast actors for it. So Gerard Butler, who's the guy who's actually the star of 300, was cast as like the captain and stuff like this. So he's got big name stars and everything all set up. And then they're like, no, movie's just too long. This is too confusing. We've got to take it out. So we ended up just taking the storyboards and whatever, commissioning an animated movie, and then that came out as a separate DVD. And then it had a making of with it and everything else. So that's technically a separate movie that comes out this year as well by them. I think that Watchmen is something that different people have different feelings on. I always liked it. I thought it was really a very faithful adaptation. One of the things that helped is I had read the Watchmen comics like 5 times. So I didn't have to have any problems following it because I kind of knew the story well enough that I just filled in any holes probably where they occurred. But it didn't really resonate necessarily with normies.
Yeah, I didn't go and see this at the time because I had not read the Alan Moore comic. Now that I've read the Alan Moore comic, I have had intentions of going and watching the movie, but I haven't actually watched the movie yet. That is something I have to put back on my list of things to do, because I do really want to see this now that I've read the comic, the graphic novel, and think I will understand what's going on, because I think that was the thing, is just looking at the trailer, it looks like a complex movie, that it looks like if you don't know the source material, you probably are going to have a hard time following it.
No, and I think that this is Zack Snyder's second best comic book movie. I really like 300 a lot. I think this one's also really good. So, but I'd say 300 probably was better. Certainly made a lot more money. So, and then last we had the year's only real success, which is X-Men Origins Wolverine. It's had a $150 million budget. It ended up grossing $373 million at the box office. Directed by Gavin Hood, starring Hugh Jackman, and also starring Ryan Reynolds, which I think is a little weird, is that this was really the first Wolverine and Deadpool movie.
Yes.
Deadpool has a small part in it and everything, and it's a very controversial part. Reynolds himself, even at the time, was not particularly pleased with how it all got cast or how it all got filmed. But this did make some solid money, and it is not a great film, but it's a solid, fun, if very dark, X-Men movie.
Right. Yeah. That is definitely a mixed bag of movie options there.
Yeah, Iron Man and the Dark Knight. It is not.
No, it is definitely not. You also have a note that there was a an award that went posthumously in
Speaking of
2009.
Dark Knight, right? So
Yes.
Dark Knight came out in 2008. The Academy Awards for 2008 are presented in 2009, and Heath Ledger actually then in 2009 was awarded the supporting actor Oscar for The Dark Knight for his portrayal of the Joker. The first time comics had ever even sniffed a Best Acting Oscar for a
Right.
comic book, like especially a superhero based comic book role. You know,
Right.
something like a history of violence or something, one of these sort of more serious topics, is a little different. But in terms of something where someone's wandering around being a long underwear sort for a supervillain, it just doesn't really happen.
But to be fair, Heath Ledger is unbelievable in that role. Like,
And
it is
and
scary.
yep, and we now have enough fantastic people playing comic book roles that it makes perfect sense they're starting to get these accolades potentially. But at the time it was pretty surprising and well deserved.
Right. All right, so let's move on and let's talk about what's going on in the comic book pages in 2009. Let's start at DC. What was going on in DC this year?
So DC finished up the Final Crisis, which of course hasn't been the Final Crisis. There have been numerous crises after Final Crisis because they need to start, keep selling books in the summer and the like. But Final Crisis ended in early 2009. They then careened directly into their next big line-wide crossover called Blackest Night. That is a sort of Green Lantern-based crossover that was fantastically popular. 5 of the 8 top-selling books of 2009 were Blackest Night comic books.
Okay.
DC had not had that kind of success in a while.
Yeah, that sounds pretty successful.
Flash Rebirth brought back Barry Allen. Barry Allen, the Flash, had died during the original Crisis back in like 1985 or 1986. Can't remember when the actual issue came out. And had remained dead until they decided that, hey, bringing Hal Jordan back was so successful and made us so much money.
Sure.
Let's try this again with the Flash. And so they brought back the Flash as well. That was, in fact, very successful. And people loved it, and it made a bunch of money. They came out with something called Wednesday Comics, which I absolutely loved. Kind of like how you used to have the Sunday Funnies, where you would have these Sunday pages that were essentially just one big comic page, and then the next week it would continue, like a Flash Gordon or whatever. They made a comic called Wednesday Comics. They took some of their best creators and let them just go ham on making essentially a Sunday comic once a week that would go into this. So each creative team was responsible for one page every week, and it would be like a Metamorpho story. And you'd get one Sunday page. The page would be like a Sunday Comics page, and then the next week the story would continue. So it was almost like getting a Sunday Funnies every week. So they called it Wednesday Comics. Nothing really like it that I'd seen before. Haven't hardly seen anything since. I absolutely loved these. And the artists just knocked it out of the park. They are absolutely beautiful comics if you ever get a chance to take a look at them.
Interesting.
Yeah, we also had a couple Batman stories. Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader by Neil Gaiman, just kind of a riff on an old famous Superman story. We got Batman and Robin, the new Batman and Robin by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely, same guys who've done the All-Star Superman stuff. The main thing here is that they brought in Bruce Wayne's son Damian, who was a child that he'd had we'd learned about this during a book called Son of the Demon way back in the day, but it had sort of just been ignored. And now we actually have Batman's son by Talia kind of come back into his life and become the new Robin. The difference, of course, is he's been raised by the League of Assassins, and his solution to most things is, why don't we just kill them?
That seems at odds to what Batman would want to do.
He has some retraining to do, and it's been questionable. Outside of DC, we got a bunch of stuff going on. The Image founders actually returned for something called Image United, which was this massive crossover across the line, where 6 of the 7 original creators sort of brought their characters back into a stew and told a story. That was pretty cool. We had a new book called Chew by John Layman. I really didn't like it. It was really dark. And in fact, this is something that I think is a sort of a reason why I think 2009 for me was kind of a miss in some ways in terms of the year. Is this really is the year where you've got political problems and everything with all of the extenuating circumstances from 9/11 and war. Now you've got the recession taking out the economy. Americans just do not have a lot of optimism going in right now, and it shows in the comics. You also see IDW rebooting G.I. Joe in a much grittier or darker, real type of environment, not even respecting really the continuity of the old Marvel comics, just kind of starting over. Robert Crumb comes out with the Book of Genesis this year, which is his retelling, essentially a faithful retelling of the Book of Genesis in his own inimitable style. And as Crumb is essentially an underground pornographer, the idea that he would decide to retell the Book of Genesis was always a little bit interesting. But so it's something to take a look at if you haven't seen it. Mazzucchelli, David Mazzucchelli came out with a book called Asterios Polyp this year. This is in no way a superhero book. It's just about like a snooty academic who gets in a relationship and then how it all works out and the like. I will give something away. This is my favorite book of the year. I think Asterios Polyp may be one of the most fantastic comic books I have ever seen. And it's not actually a comic book, it's a graphic novel, literally. He published it as a collected volume. It's a few hundred pages. But it is just astonishing. Great stuff.
Really? Huh.
Yes.
I mean I loved David Mazzucchelli's art that we've seen through the years. I'm kind of interested in this. That seems kind of I might have to take a look.
It's a little hoity-toity. Again, not to give things away, but he actually wins the Todd Klein Memorial Lettering Award for this year. He wins Letterer of the Year off of this book because he uses the lettering to tell the story, again, in a way that you hardly ever see anybody do. And that once you kind of see what he's up to, you're like, oh, okay, that's really cool. So it's got all sorts of things going on.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Highly recommended if you've not read Asterios Polyp. Richard Stark's Parker the Hunter came out by Darwin Cook. Again, Cook really liked these books, the Hunter series of books. He decided to adapt them, and he did it as a labor of love. So it's, I think, 3 or 4 of them that came out before he stopped doing it. He was getting ill and didn't necessarily have the productivity he did before. But all of them are masterpieces and really, really worth your trouble. So, new Parker book came out this year. Joe Sacco came out with Footnotes in Gaza, which is a renowned sort of journalism/history text.
Okay.
Seth, who's a really quirky Canadian cartoonist, came out with something called George Sprott this year. Brian Azzarello, fresh off of trying to destroy Superman, has a book called Filthy Rich that sends him back more to his roots as kind of a crime author. And It's really, really entertaining stuff. Harvey Pekar, much like Robert Crumb, comes out with a book that's a little different than what he normally does. Actually does a graphic history of the Beat poets. He calls it The Beats, a graphic history. And Pekar previously, of course, is the guy from American Splendor who goes on David Letterman and is all acerbic and everything. This is not what he normally does. He's normally telling basically the story of his life, right? And so this is kind of a cool thing if you're a Pekar fan, or even more importantly, if you think the idea of Harvey Pekar's stuff is interesting, but you're really just not interested in what's happening to a normal schlub in Cleveland, this gives you a chance to see what he does if he's trying a different kind of storytelling. Right. Scott Pilgrim versus the Universe, which is one of the final chapters of the Scott Pilgrim saga, comes out. Jeff Lemire brings out Essex County, which is critically acclaimed and sort of is one of the first times he really gets notoriety for his work. Lemire's, of course, going to be now somebody that is always coming out with crazy new stuff and doing interesting things. So he's become one of the, in my opinion anyways, one of the real sort of iconoclastic writers of modern comics. Because he's coming out with stuff like, Minor Arcana now, or he did Sentient, different genres, different everything. He just got some really cool stuff going. But Essex County was kind of where he started, or at least it's where I first really encountered it. We had Stitches by David Small, which was a memoir that many people think is one of the more well done or important memoirs of the early 20th century in comics. And then The Eternal Smile by Gene Wang Yan and Derek Kim is another really fantastic entry in sort of that series of books that Yang did, starting with American-Born Chinese. So I really like all of these. A lot of stuff that's really dark coming out this year. I would say, most of the stuff coming out is dark. And I didn't highlight a lot of the stuff that is just sort of depressing, sort of mud. But there was still, when I started looking, man, there's a lot of good stuff still that comes out every year in comics.
Yeah, this is quite the list. Let's dive a little bit more into sales and industry information. So you said sales were down.
Yep.
Across the board, and that ended up leading to a pretty big number of closures of comic book stores.
Yep.
What sort of numbers are we talking about with regards to like total sales then for this year?
So sales ended up being 429 million, which it wasn't a whole lot different than before. But again, it's more just a matter of looking at it in relation to not only the arc we'd been on previously, which was sort of a nice gradual increase.
Yeah.
But also just looking at the fact that on the back end with the stores closing and the higher prices and everything else, there were a lot of problems. Sales of graphic novels actually were down almost 15%. So
that's big, because graphic novels have been kind of the thing that's been propping things up over the last few years. Those have always been 5, 8, almost 10%, up each year because and have been so popular.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it's got almost to do with when money runs short. If you just like recreational drugs, you'll maybe not go out and buy so many of them. But if you're actually addicted, then you're just stuck and you're still spending the money. And that's kind of where we're probably at. The people who, comics are their thing, they're going to keep buying. But maybe some of the folks in bookstores who were picking up just because they had some cash and it looked cool are now having to make choices to use their money elsewhere. So
that is quite the analogy, Dan.
I could be entirely wrong, but we'll see.
So you said 5 of the top 8 books were from that Blackest Night DC crossover event, and that DC actually outsold Marvel this year for the first time in God.
In 1 month.
Just for one month.
Just 1 month. But I mean, baby steps, right?
Okay.
Baby steps. It's the first time in ages they'd actually won a month in sales. And so they were pretty happy about that. Overall, the top seller of the year was a slam dunk. We actually had a Marvel book when Barack Obama was elected. DC decided to do a sort of cover, just sort of, for the inauguration month. So in January of 2009, they put out an Amazing Spider-Man book. This was issue number 538 or something. I can't remember which one. Which actually had sales 150% higher than the number 2 finisher for the year. So it sold 530,000 copies. And the number 2 book, which I think was actually Blackest Night number 1, sold 205,000.
Wow.
So it's not even in the range. It's literally, insane how many more copies it sold than everybody else. For that 1 month, DC did actually, outsell Marvel. And we also had some restructuring that happened. because DC for a long time had been owned by Warner Brothers. This year it was renamed to DC Entertainment. Warner sort of restructured to bring it more closely into the corporate fold, put someone named Diane Nelson in charge, and Paul Levitz was sort of either stepped down or was asked to step down from being publisher and president, and instead returned to editing and writing books for DC. And don't worry too much about Levitz. He's going to make a comeback. He is a lifer at DC, and he's one of their most important creators. If we're doing like a DC series instead of Marvel, Levitz is kind of a Joe Quesada type of person in terms of he's just there for a long time and doing his thing, and he's always been really successful there. So he's been back all the way where he wrote like the Great Darkness Legion books that I was a big fan of back in the late 70s when I was a kid. So
gotcha.
Anyway, but so they've changed to be more brought into the corporate fold. This just happens this year, so we won't start seeing changes from that for a while. But they did do some top level changes. Okay. Dark Horse actually rolled out iPhone compatible versions of a lot of its comic books, some of its most popular titles, so that you could then purchase them and view them on the phone if you wanted to, instead of buying the physical versions. So this is an early attempt at digital comic marketing. So even in 2009, they're already starting to figure out ways to try and sell directly to customers over the web.
Did that work out very well?
No, it did not. There's a problem. Okay. The problem is you don't have a storefront and you don't have a real ecosystem.
I suppose not.
That's why we're waiting for Comixology and we're waiting for some of these other stuff and the like to really take off, because you need to have a place people can get all their comics, not just a place where you go to get a couple of them and then you need another app to get another. And your whole collection is, it's a disaster.
You also then are really beholden to the Apple ecosystem and the Apple Store and different things like this. And so what about all the like Google people and all those phones, the Samsung phones that are using the Android OS? That
is correct as well. So another thing they were doing, Marvel and others started rolling out what they call motion comics. They're attempting to make comic book stories a little bit more interactive and vibrant as they're trying to find a way to market them digitally. Watchmen from DC was turned into a motion comic. And the new Spider-Woman series that Bendis was doing was actually designed from the ground up as a motion comic compatible title. So Spider-Woman by Bendis and Malieve was the first comic book to be designed specifically with presentation on the web in mind.
Wow.
And it's still a physical book, but right. they actually looked at it as a, how can we make sure this still looks good on the web and things like this.
You've got an interesting note here about manga in 2009.
Absolutely. So we've been seeing that, comic sales are increasing and manga sales are rapidly increasing in America over the last decade. For the first time this year, the New York Times actually publishes a manga bestseller list, telling us who had the top selling volume each week. And for that year, Naruto takes 18 weeks, Bleach had 9 weeks, Vampire Knight had 7 weeks, Fruits Basket had 4, Negima had 3, Chibi Vampire had 1, as did Full Metal Alchemist, Warriors, Ravenpaw Path. I think this is interesting culturally and in terms of the industry, because what you're seeing is that not only are manga getting important enough that they're starting to get their own list, but also there's no decision to just fold them in with other comic books. It remains a separate market and a separate sort of really, really genre and medium, even though they're both comics, right?
Yeah.
They're not two separate mediums.
No, it's just two flavors of the same thing, right?
Two flavors of comics. And so it's weird that they don't get folded in, but just the way they're sold and everything else, it's very hard to even compare them as apples to apples at this point. And really even today, because they're still sold so differently. And my last note, just in case you happen to want to feel bad for him, Kevin Smith's comic book shop in LA was actually one of the hundreds or thousands to close this year. So among all of the different ones that were going under, the Silent Bob's Secret Stash or whatever it's called was one of the victims this year of the comic book catastrophe.
Right. We have some passings this year, some notable passings.
Yeah, quite a few of them. Most of these, I mean, are people I know. I'm not sure if everybody's going to have heard of all of these. Rick Estrada was a guy who I liked his art. He worked for DC for quite a long time. He passed away this year. George Tuska, who you may or may not remember hearing that name, he actually is the first artist of Iron Man in his own title. Not in terms of he's a co-creator of Iron Man, but that he was the guy who drew Iron Man #1 when he got his own book finally around 1970. Tuska is just a fantastically good workman-like artist. He also did a lot of really cool stuff in comic, like newspaper strips and stuff like that back in the early part of the century. So he was in his 90s when he died this season. And then we had another Marvel guy, Joe Rosen, who next to like Lee and Kirby, Stan Goldberg and Joe Rosen probably were the core of early Marvel. So he was a letterer who pretty much lettered every one of the great Marvel comic books of the early to mid 60s.
Oh, okay.
Like he was the letterer. You know, it didn't matter who got done with the comic book. Once they got the art done, it went to Rosen and he lettered, right? So this is a guy who had a fantastic influence on the house style of Marvel in terms of how some of the balloons and the lettering and the big biffs and pows and whatever all got done, because he was the one that made those decisions. But last then, again, we're going to go over to manga here. We actually this year lost an artist named Yoshito Usui. He did a series called Crayon Shin-chan. It's not so much that he was a legendary artist, but that I think that for a lot of people, his death, which he was found at the bottom of the cliff, generally is considered to be a suicide, I believe, started to highlight exactly how difficult and extreme the life of Japanese cartoonists was. That a lot of these guys were working 7 days a week, 16 to 18 hours a day to try and keep up with the deadlines of the Japanese manga weekly market. And that because of that, they were dying young and they were having nervous breakdowns. And it was just, it was like what we'd been hearing about from graphics and animator staff at the Marvel Studios.
Oh yeah.
Times 2.
Oh god.
It just these guys were just getting murdered, and so it's still something that those guys end up with some crazy schedules. But I think this was sort of the start of Japan starting to take a look a little bit at what was going on with that and trying to make a change in that culture.
Okay. So let's move on and let's talk about the Eisners for 2009. Obviously, these would have been awarded in 2010, but what were some of the big winners, or who are some of the standouts that you want to highlight here from the Eisner Awards for work done in 2009?
I think I love the fact that Captain America 601, best single issue or best single story, was Red, White, and Blue Blood by Ed Brubaker and Gene Colan. Colan won a frickin' Eisner at 70 years old or whatever he was, probably older than that. Really makes me happy. I think that was a great call. It was a good story, and it's just cool seeing somebody who's been in the industry that long get the recognition. I believe that probably was his first Eisner Award. Because
I don't remember us talking about him getting an award before now.
Most of his best stuff was done before the Eisner Awards existed. So because of that, Tomb of Dracula was never up for an Eisner because it had ended before they started. So, Walking Dead gets Best Continuing Series. Shoe gets Best New Series. Beasts of Burden was the best publication for teens that had Jill Thompson on art. Humor, Scott Pilgrim wins. I like the fact that digital comic now is a regular thing. So Sin Titulo by Cameron Stewart won that. Cameron Stewart then goes on to do various actual DC and Marvel books in a few years. The best adaptation, that was Richard Stark's Parker by Darwin Cook. Graphic album, Astris Polyp does win that, as it well should.
And Mazzucchelli won Best Writer Artist for that as well, it looks like.
Yeah, Best Writer was Brubaker for Captain America, Daredevil, The Marvels Project, Criminal, Incognito. All of those are fantastic, by the way. Like, Incognito was a great story. The criminals he was doing at that time. The Marvels Project, I don't actually remember much about. But everything else on that list is great. Yeah, Mazzucchelli for Writer-Artist. Writer-Artist Nonfiction is Joe Sacco, 100% deserved. Penciler Inker, J.H. Williams III. The stuff he was doing on Detective Comics at this point was just astonishing. Jill Thompson won for Beasts of Burden for Painter or Multimedia. Williams won again for Cover Artist. Colorist, you got Dave Stewart. Letterer, Mazzucchelli, again for Astros Polyp. And then if we go down to the Hall of Fame, you've got Steve Gerber going in, of course, of Howard the Duck fame. Dick Giordano, who not only had edited and sort of done management stuff at DC for a long time, but was a great Batman artist, and also he was the inker on a lot of Neil Adams' best stuff for DC. And so Giordano, massively important in the history of DC, both as a creator and also as a person in the back office. Vern Hogarth, who was an early sort of like artist, did a lot of stuff on Tarzan and the like. I would say a lot of comic artists, Vern Hogarth was the guy they went to study anatomy when they were getting ready to do stuff. He was considered to just be a fantastic draftsman of the human form and stuff like this.
Okay.
Michael Kaluta goes in, who's been one of my favorite artists for a long time. I love almost everything he does. He's just got this real sort of loose, flowy kind of art that nonetheless is absolutely brilliant in terms of storytelling. Well deserved. Had a bunch of crazy stuff back in the 80s that I really liked. Most of his stuff was a little bit naughty. That was kind of the nature of like of most of them, but they were a lot of fun. Drew beautiful women, told interesting stories. Bob Montana and Mort Weisinger, a couple of other sort of classics. So a good Hall of Fame class, and well deserved.
Yes. All right. Before we move on to talk about Marvel, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to tee it up for you anyway. What was your favorite non-Marvel comic in 2009?
As noted, Astris Polyp is an effing masterpiece. It is absolutely brilliant. And it is not anything like Daredevil. It is not anything like any of the other superhero stuff that we've been reading here. It's kind of this weird esoteric sort of egghead thing that's got all sorts of feelings in it, and but it is absolutely brilliant.
All right.
Final answer.
I'm gonna have to see this then. If it's worthy of that level of recommendation, I think I need to read this. So let's move on. Let's talk about what happened in Marvel in 2009. The year in Marvel.
Excelsior!
All right, Dan, let's talk about Marvel in 2009. Obviously, the industry as a whole didn't have a very good year. What did it look like for Marvel?
I mean, it depends on, in terms of in-universe, these were truly the darkest days of the Marvel Universe. And in terms of the stories they were telling within the 616, you had Norman Osborn, Ascendant, the heroes were in trouble, we were coming out of Dark Reign, and essentially into a world where now instead of Osborn taking over, Osborn has taken over, and it's become the new normal, right?
Oh, God.
So this whole thing is just a disaster. In terms of the stories, or in terms of sales and the like, they're somewhat cruising along. I'm a little bit astonished by some of the numbers we'll talk about. So the main thing for me is that there was a total number of series of 681 this year.
That's huge.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, that is bigger than it's been since like the early 90s.
They had a lot of limited series that careened into this year. They have started now getting enough actual continuing series, and they pumped out just an ungodly number of new series. So they had 513 new series, 506 series that ended.
Oh,
But that would still mean that there's like 150 different series out there. A lot of these are printings or reprintings of graphic novel editions, collected editions, that sort of stuff.
Gotcha.
So it's not all new comics, but they are all new SKU numbers. Like new things that are taking up space on shelves in comic stores.
That makes sense.
So, yeah.
So you have a note here. There are 7 series that have reached 100 issues or more currently.
Yeah, this is new because they kind of canceled everything. And Daredevil actually joined as the 7th issue. So it is the 7th comic now in Marvel with 100 issues or more. So, and once that happens, you don't have to worry about getting canceled. You're going to be there. You're going to be there forever.
That's exactly how that works.
Don't tell people, Dwayne. We don't want them to be sad. So.
Best-selling comics, you said Amazing Spider-Man. It ended up being issue 583. That was the Obama inauguration day one that did 530,000 copies. What other big titles were there?
Captain America Reborn, which is the one where Cap comes back from the dead, 199,000, and Dark Avengers number 1, 136,000. And you'll also see that for a few years here, we're getting better reporting than we've ever had before. I've not been able most of the time to tell you how many books these things sold. Now for a little while we're able to. They will hide all of this again soon, so don't get used to it.
Okay. So what about in-universe events this year? Did we have anything big going on this year?
4 of them? We had a 54-issue series called War of the Kings, which is across multiple titles. Where Vulcan, who's the new leader of the Shi'ar Empire, is rapidly expanding. Black Bolt and the Inhumans actually take over the Kree, and then we get a cosmic war that begins. A lot of your cosmic heroes, Nova, Guardians, all those guys end up getting dragged into it. So this becomes kind of the big cosmic sort of crossover of the year.
Okay.
We also have Utopia, which is where Norman Osborn is trying to actually create his own Dark X-Men, the same way he'd created Dark Avengers. We have Nation X, which is 21 books, where the X-Men are trying to actually settle into a new life on the asteroid M that they've renamed to Utopia. They'd end up having kind of like battles against all sorts of different folks, Avengers and Atlanteans and whoever. So that one goes through a number of books. And then we have Necrosha, which was 14 issues. It's Selene the Black Queen finding that techno-organic virus, which previously had been a problem a few years ago, and she's going in and trying to resurrect various mutants and turn herself into an actual goddess. Because previously, Selene is actually like another name for the moon, and so she's pretended to be the goddess of the moon before, but she's actually mutant. So,
gotcha.
There we go.
Okay. Interesting stuff. So what about so what's outside of those events? What is sort of going on at say Marvel as far as outside the comics? Is there anything going on with Marvel and some of the other things that they're
I think I
dealing
see
with?
where you're trying to lead me. There's only one bullet point really that matters this year, and that is that
Right.
Disney does announce that they're buying Marvel Comics, and Marvel Entertainment for $4 billion. Four with a B on the alien. This is something that at the time seemed like it was a crazy number. In retrospect, it seems like a crazy number for entirely other reasons.
Yes.
Right?
It seemed entirely too high before. Now it seems entirely way too low.
Yep, exactly. But this isn't actually going to be completed this year, so we're going to see this sort of roll along. As of right now, there's no changes at Marvel because this is just an announcement that sort of they're going to, near the end of the year, they'll be taking steps to try and actually complete the purchase and the like. But for 2009, Marvel still remains much the same. During that time, they actually also acquired the rights to Marvel Man. And this is, I've got a book actually that talks about sort of the crazy history of Miracle Man / Marvel Man and how he came out of an attempt by the UK to continue making new Captain Marvel stories after DC sort of killed Captain Marvel in the United States. And then the name changed. So for a while, Todd McFarlane owned the rights. Then he got into a kind of scuffle with, because it's originally the rights went to Alan Moore, and he'd done some things, and eventually those rights got sold to McFarlane, maybe, and then McFarlane got in a thing over a character called Angela with Neil Gaiman, and Gaiman kind of also wanted the rights to Miracle Man / Marvel Man. So when they got to trial, and McFarlane actually lost, one of the things he actually did, or was going to lose, they traded, and somehow Angela went back to McFarlane, and Miracle Man ended up with Gaiman, or something like this. But in any case, at a certain point, Gaiman had the rights, and then he sold them to Marvel and started trying to continue the story, the Miracle Man story, that he'd started something like 20 years previously. So, all this is kind of going on. No new Marvel Man or Miracle Man comics this year, but it did mean that they had the right to do new stories and also reprint at least some of the old ones. Many of the caveats with that involving Alan Moore, who never wants to deal with anybody in any of this stuff and is always just angry.
Yes.
There were no new MCU movies this year. We did get that Wolverine Origins that came out from Sony, but as far as the new Marvel Studios, they're going to be waiting until 2011 until the next one comes out.
All right. So what about in the comics themselves? What was going on? What were some of the big things that happened in the comics this year?
If you remember the Ultimate Universe, we've talked about a number of times. Ultimatum was another event that actually blew up the Marvel Ultimate Universe and sort of respawned it with Ultimate Spider-Man Volume 2, number 1. So we kind of start over.
Okay.
That had various levels of success, but this was essentially something that, they decided that it had gotten too convoluted and they wanted to start over. They kind of did the same thing again just a little while ago here because we now have a new Ultimate Universe in Marvel that came out just like 2 years ago with another new Ultimate Spider-Man, which is good stuff, actually.
I think I remember something about that. Yeah, okay.
Yep. So, continues to happen. Michelini and Layton returned to Iron Man to do a story called The End, which was ostensibly the final Tony Stark Iron Man story, where he passes off the torch to new Iron Man named Nick Travis.
What?
This guy is obviously forgotten to history, right? But for a while, the actual canon answer to who's the next Iron Man was Nick Travis. So I would love to see somebody do something with that. Maybe they have, but I don't recall it. There was also a World's Most Wanted Iron Man story this year. We had the Dark Avengers by Bendis and Deodato. Mike Deodato is just a fantastic artist. So these were beautiful stories. My problem was I just didn't enjoy Norman Osborn as, leading this group of dumbass criminals as the Avengers. So it just never really interested me. Dakin actually takes over the Wolverine title. So now you have a basically homicidal Wolverine, who's Wolverine's crazed son is the Wolverine. I did like that Captain America came back. Hickman takes over the Fantastic Four and starts an absolutely fantastic run with a lot of the things like the Council of Reeds. I believe this was far enough before that when you look at Rick and Morty, there's something called the Council of Ricks. Appears to be a direct ripoff of Hickman's effort. Bendis, or if for some reason Rick and Morty was first, Council of Reeds is a direct ripoff of Rick and Morty, but I think Hickman had it first.
Sure.
We talked about Bendis and Weave taking over Spider-Woman. This is something that they left Daredevil in like 2005 to do Spider-Woman, and it did not come out until 2009. Partly this is just Maleev taking his time, partly it's other things, whatever, but this was supposed to be like a month after Daredevil ended, Spider-Woman was going to come out, and it just did not.
It just kept going and going and going until
just did not.
It finally went, apparently. Okay.
And then we don't often talk about variant covers, but Marvel is starting to get sort of hungry for variant covers. They did some of it with the zombies stuff, and now here. And so they actually did a Wolverine art appreciation variant covers, where they actually had variant covers based off of, like, what would it look like if Picasso did a Wolverine cover, or etc. And so, yeah. So they were starting to dip their toes into this sort of thing.
This sounds to me like kind of a money grab.
Yeah, a little ridiculous.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about some of those 513 new series here. What are some of the notable ones that we should call out that debuted this year?
So there's a New Mutants series that came out. It's going to end up going 50 issues. That's by far the most successful title that launches in 2009. Secret Warriors and Ultimate Spider-Man are both going to go over 25 issues. X-Men Forever is going to go for a while. Deadpool has a Deadpool team-up book. There's also Deadpool Merc with a Mouth, and Deadpool itself with some collected editions, all would come out this year. So Deadpool has a big year. Ultimate Avengers comes out. Wolverine's Weapon X, Dark Wolverine, Dark Avengers, Punisher, War Machine, Web of Spider-Man. There's new Incredible Hulk, new Black Panther, Powers returns, Bendis' creator-owned series. Vengeance of the Moon Knight comes out this year. So I don't know if you remember Vengeance of the Moon Knight.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yep.
It's so. Just as I'm looking at this, most of these books are like 12 issues or less.
Yep.
And to me, it seems weird to call them, like
ongoing
because like that's almost like a limited series at that point.
Ongoing series should go 380 issues, is what we're saying, and they should.
No, it should go at least 2 years, I would say.
I'd 100% agree, and that they would like that too. Most of these were canceled because the sales did not continue at a level
didn't
that
warrant to keep them going.
And in some cases where they think that the book still has some sort of potential, what they'll do is they will cancel it and then they'll bring it back with another creative team. What we're going to see, in fact, is that one of our ending series this year is actually the previous Moon Knight book, which went 30 issues, and then they canceled it and they started Vengeance of the Moon Knight. And what they really did in that case is they decided they want to go new creative direction. They want new creators on the book, and they want to kind of give people a reason to onboard, because maybe people had sort of started drifting away from Moon Knight. I don't know if you remember, but the last few issues of that 30-issue Moon Knight book got really sort of weird.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they just sort of closed it down, reopened with a new name, see if they could make it work. A lot of these are going to do that. Web of Spider-Man, folds up. There'll be another new Spider-Man book that comes out the next month afterwards, right? What I think is interesting about this is how many of these are Punisher, Deadpool, War Machine, Dark Wolverine, Wolverine. These are
dark,
dark
gritty.
characters.
Yeah.
Yep. Anti-heroes, right? What's interesting is that probably the books that are the least anti-heroish are Ultimate Spider-Man and New Mutants, which are the ones that last.
Right.
So I think there's in some ways also this disconnect between what the comics creators and what the comics publisher thinks people want and what they actually maybe want.
And then the customers are voting with their wallets, and it ultimately ends up that some of these books end up getting canceled.
Almost all of them. I mean, like you said, of the like 20 some that were created this year, only 4 of them make it to 2 years, and one of them just barely gets to 24. So, you really have an almost complete failure rate 2 years in on all of these books that are created. And it's probably it's more like almost 30 actually. So
what about on the limited side, the ones that were supposed to go a set number of books? What were some of the highlights here? What were some of the bigger titles we should note?
We had some Hasbro Secret Wars tie-in stuff. Basically, things kind of literally designed to sell toys.
Sure.
The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which actually won some awards. We had Marvel's Project, the Uncanny X-Men First Class, which this is not the same First Class that the movie was made on, but they stole the title. Marvel's Eye of the Camera was a relatively cool series. I like that. Punisher Warzone, Spider-Man's Clone Saga, which I think might have been actually a reprint. That has to be a reprint, isn't it? Anyway, we had Dark Tower, Fall of Gilead, that Captain America Reborn series, which we talked about, that sold quite a few copies. War of the Kings was the miniseries. Ultimatums is another one. There was some Ender books. Do you remember the like Ender books by Orson Scott Card back in the day? Marvel actually got the licenses for that and did comic books based off them. We got Anita Blake as well, Laughing Corpse limited series, so they were doing those. So they were trying to do a few things that were kind of tying back into book series. And then there was just a lot of zombies and Dark Reign stuff. And
yeah.
Yeah.
And like most of these are like 4 or 5 issues.
Yep.
That seems to be kind of the standard length for
that is the standard length. 4 issues is the standard miniseries length. Always has been. They have started moving that sometimes now to 5, just because it makes a better trade paperback. But or even 6 if they really want. But usually if they've got 6, then they'll just move it into an actual like regular comic and call it a story.
Gotcha.
So, the other ones just to note are the noirs. So X-Men Noir, Spider-Man Noir, and Daredevil Noir all came out this year. So.
Right, okay. So let's talk about new characters. Were there any notable new characters that came out of the all these new books?
Can I just say no and we move on, or do we have to actually go through the receipts?
I recognize one name in this list, and it's because she is a recent addition to Marvel Snap. Actually, Victoria Hand.
Really? All right.
Yes.
That sounds good. So these are the characters that were mentioned on the lists I looked through. There are 6 characters who were notable enough to be listed. Victoria Hand, Humberto Lopez, who's known as the Reptile, or Reptile, R-E-P-T-I-L, there's no E on it. Eden Fezzi, who's Manifold from Secret Warriors. Bentley Whitman is out of Fantastic Four. Lana Baumgartner is Bombshell out of the Ultimate Universe. And Victor Hernan Alvarez is a new Power Man who debuted during Dark Reign. And most of these, having looked at them, are in a few books. So like Bombshell, Power Man, a lot of them have appeared in 50 to 75 books over the last decade or 15 years. But none of them really have ever had their own series, I don't think. Or Power Man might have. I'm not sure if he headlined one or if he was part of a group. But obviously he's not the main Power Man. It's not like he took over, right? So, yeah, this is a disappointing list, to say the least.
Given the number of new books this year, this seems like an incredibly light list of new characters that have
keep in mind,
level stage.
That a lot of those new books are collected editions or reprints of other stuff. So they're not necessarily new material in the new books. It's just, again, new SKU numbers to put on the shelf.
Gotcha.
But yes, there were, but when we looked, there were a lot of new titles. There were a lot of, they should have had more stuff. I'm not defending them. Yes, I feel I accidentally was defending their lack of innovation.
I did not get the impression that you were defending them.
I apologize.
Let's talk about series that came to an end this year. These are ongoing titles that had been going at least a year. What were some of the big ones that came to an end?
Well, most of them, they killed the Ultimate Universe, right? So Ultimate Spider-Man, 133 issues. Ultimate X-Men at 100 issues. Ultimate Fantastic Four at 60 issues were three of the big ones to get taken out. And then, of course, they're rebooting the universe, doing some different things and continuing on from there. But not all of these just come back automatically because of that. Marvel Adventures had Fantastic Four and Avengers titles, which got canceled at 49 and 39. Those were kids' books. We had Wolverine that ended at 81. Again, that's because Dakin, the Dark Wolverine, took over.
Sure.
Punisher ends at 65. Then he gets like two of his own other books again. So this is not necessarily so much the character is going out of the spotlight as that they just rebooted. She-Hulk ends at 38. Ghost Rider ends at 35. Amazing Spider-Girl ends at 31. Our beloved Moon Knight dips out at 30. Immortal Iron Fist at 28. And I believe that one probably ended mostly because the creators were leaving. Because it had a very distinct sort of feel and story. And so that, they kind of told the story, and I'm not sure it was canceled because of sales. I think maybe they just decided to move on. I can't say that for sure. Punisher War Journal ends. New Warriors ends at 20. New Exiles at 19. Marvel 2-in-1, Captain Britain. Runaways was at 14. Young X-Men, Scar, Son of Hulk, and Squadron Supreme all made exactly 12 issues. So when you look at it, it's a lot of books that had a decent run that ended. We lost 3, 6, 9, like 15 to 20 books ended this year, which is a lot. So, yeah.
Right, so let's look at the bullpen, the creative force behind all these books being created. Our editor-in-chief still Joe Quesada this year?
It is.
Okay.
We're going to have to check that closely the next couple of years, though, just as a note. 'Cause,
okay.
I hate to foreshadow someone's demise. But,
sure. What sort of number are we talking about creators getting credits this year?
The credited creators is ridiculous. And this, of course, includes, Stan Lee every year because they're always reprinting something from him. We are at 824 credited creators this year, which is nuts.
That is a lot. And that's a bigger number than I think we've seen in a while. And it's because there's so many books that got
it is the biggest number we've ever seen. We've never had 800 people credited before. That's insane.
What about new staff? How many people got their first credit this year?
159.
That's a pretty good number as well.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah. It's not all that unusual. I think we're normally a little over 100 to 150, right around there. But it's a bit higher than normal.
Yeah. All right, so let's up that 159. Though that was your list to look at for Rookie of the Year this year. This is our considered to be the best new creator at Marvel this year. How many people actually had some staying power of that in 159?
All right. So first off, I want to caveat this that it's not normally the best creator at young creator at Marvel this year. It's the person who's like the Rookie of the Year in terms of what they've done for Marvel. right?
Sure.
Because that's mattered sometimes. We've had some guys who
I
are
suppose.
fantastic, but then they just go off and work at DC their whole career after doing like 2 books. But
Right.
so there were 159 people who started they got their first Marvel credit this year. Only 50% of those, or about 80, have more than 5 total credits in the 15 years since. Okay? So almost all of these just disappeared.
One and done, they said.
Or 5 and done.
One and done.
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
Under
So
5 and done, yeah.
They'd get to do a couple of things and then they'd just be on their way and have not returned. So outside of that, there were quite a few talented folks. And so I want to note both people who have been particularly skilled and have done great stuff, but also just people who've, through their, the number of things they've done for Marvel, have been important. So the highest actual number of credits of anybody who, at Marvel, of anybody who started this year is Clayton Cowles, who has over 2,000 books, 2,115 books that he's credited on up through 2003, which is when I stopped running my reports. He's a letterer, so that's one of the reasons he can get this many credits.
I was going to say right? that makes sense.
But he's also an Eisner-nominated letterer. He's good at what he does. But again, you have to be to keep getting a big company like Marvel to feed you work.
Right.
Similarly, we've got Matthew Wilson, who's got 359 credits. He's a colorist, also Eisner-nominated, very talented fellow. Frank Martin has over 300 credits as a writer and then also as a colorist, mostly as a colorist. Cullen Bunn has 240 credits as a writer for Marvel. X-Men, Deadpool, Venom are kind of, Deadpool and Venom especially are kind of where he has made his mark there. Yeah. He also has a small Moon Knight run that we'll be seeing here in a few years. 2015 or so, he will take over. This is going to be the series that's started by Warren Ellis, and then he takes over and will be on it sort of after, I think, Wood and then Bunn. So he maybe only has one story arc. But he's a good writer, somebody who I've enjoyed a lot of the stuff from. Again, 240 credits. Sarah Pacelli is an artist who, her art is absolutely just phenomenal. She's an Italian artist. Also is, in terms of sort of making their mark, she is the co-creator of Miles Morales. You may or may not have heard from the billion-dollar movies that have been created. And so,
that was with Brian Michael Bendis, wasn't it?
Correct. Yep, Bendis is the writer on those. Yep, and so she's got 184 credits and is a very, very good potential for a Rookie of the Year. I would say that in many years she would certainly be the choice. David Baldion, David Lopez, Jim Campbell, Marjorie Liu, Tim Seeley, Kenneth Rocafort, and Matt Kint all also did their first Marvel work this year. Nearly all of them have gone on to do really cool stuff elsewhere or do really cool stuff with Marvel, but they don't necessarily have the bulk of work to be nominated for the award.
All right, so that's a lot of pretty cool and successful creators here. So if all of those did not quite make the cut, who ends up being the Rookie of the Year for 2009?
So I guess for me, the thing is that this is a sort of a writer who spent a lot of time on core books and has done some really sort of lauded things within Marvel over the last while. And also just can't be a bad choice because even outside of Marvel has just been a fantastic creator for the last 2 decades. So Kieran Gillen has 278 Marvel credits. He's written X-Men, he's written Eternals books, he wrote Thor. He's done a lot of work on Star Wars, including being sort of the, I think, co-creator of Dr. Aphra, and then the writer who sort of started that character. Gillen is just somebody who has this cool modern vibe to his writing. He's done a bunch of stuff actually with Jamie McElvey. They did like Phonogram back in the day. And right now he's working on Power Fantasy. he's basically been somebody who every time there's a book he touches, it just is cool somehow.
Okay.
And I like all of Gillen's stuff. There was a time where in Marvel, I kind of avoided a lot of the regular superhero stuff. But if I saw Gillen was on a book, I would still read it. And so to me, that's somebody who, just kept pushing these characters forward, even through tough times. I think he's a good choice. If someone wanted to fight me over the fact it should be Pacelli instead, I would not put up much of a defense, because you don't have to do a whole lot else if you've created Miles Morales.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, she's done a lot else, because a lot of her actual interior art has been just fantastic and glorious and beautiful, and deserves to be celebrated too. So, but Gillen's just a favorite of mine, so I'm going with that as the tiebreaker.
All right. So, congratulations to Kieran Gillen for your Rookie of the Year for 2009. Dan, we're running out of time here, but before we go, your favorite Marvel comic from 2009.
We're not already out of time? I thought, sure, we were. Well, I've got other things to talk about if we're not out of time.
Let's wrap this up here.
Alrighty, fine. I think my favorite this year was still Daredevil. Daredevil actually has been solid all through, and the 2009 stuff was interesting. Otherwise, it would be the Immortal Iron Fist books. Both of these were, in actual fact, really good books, with, in my mind, not a whole lot of competition this year. Because the Marvel books as a whole were pretty dour this year. So
yeah, okay.
Some folks dug that, not me.
Yeah, and we get a big issue 500 this year in Daredevil as well.
Yep,
which is weird because they were just in the in the 100 and teens here just yesterday.
How does that even happen? How do you have your 100th issue one year and your 500th issue the next? It seems like someone's cheating.
The magic of numbers, I guess. But we will definitely talk about that in more detail next week. But until then, that is going to wrap it up for us for now. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That'll help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Now, whether you're new to the podcast, you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Did we miss something in 2009 that you thought was great? Tell us about it. Plus, we gave you some homework. We want to know, what do you think about history? Where should we leave off talking about the year in comics? 2015, 2020? Should we try and do all the way up to current day? And also, if you have some thoughts on what we should do next, we'd love to get those thoughts. Send us them via email. The address is comments@comicsovertime. Or you can reach out via Blue Sky on social media. We are at Comics Overtime there. Dan, it is a big week coming up next week. We're going to be talking about that 500th issue of Daredevil. We see Devil's Reign has a pretty big impact towards the end of the year as well. And you know what? I'm going to spill it a little bit. We have the return of the Kingpin.
Yes, indeed. The Bad Penny.
A lot to look forward to next week. We hope you'll join us. Until then, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.